I am very excited to be here to give this talk. If you would like to access these slides, I have them up on there's a redirect at tatianamac.com/perfmatters. And then if you'd like to slide into my DMs, I'm on Twitter at TatianaTMac. All right, so a little bit about me. Fun fact is I started designing when I was 10. And the reason for that is that my parents owned a small pre-press business, which many of you are probably too young to know what that is, but it's effectively a step that used to occur manually before things went to press. So they owned this business throughout my childhood, and one year, virtually overnight, the entire business became digitized. So my dad had to go back to school full time, which meant my mom had to work 3 jobs because he was now not a second income, but actually using quite a bit of money. And that left 10-year-old me with nowhere to go, and my parents found out the hard way it's illegal to leave a 10-year-old at home over a certain number of hours. So what I did was I went to school with my dad. So they set me up on a gumdrop iMac in the back of the class, and I learned destructive Photoshop, which is like what basically Photoshop before layers, Corel Draw, Macromedia Freehand, and if you don't know how to use all those tools, you should learn them because they're better than Figma and Sketch right now. But I didn't pursue design. I learned all these tools and I basically used it to make in-sync websites. If you ever want to explore some of my past, you can go to insync2000.net. That was a domain that I owned in my teens. But I really wanted to actually be a journalist. So I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, use my love for languages and my insatiable curiosity to help tell the stories of the world. Well, I graduated into the recession, and that's like when everything was the death of print. You're not gonna find a job, you're gonna be like writing meaningless stuff on this little website called twitter.com. You might as well do something else. So I have hustle in me, so I emailed every single person I knew when I graduated and asked them how I could give them design services. Didn't matter what it was. I made belly dancing websites, I made weird postcards for like postmodern performance art. So I have a very eclectic portfolio as a result. I ended up working agency side for a long time and built a design team from basically 2 people to 26 designers, developers, content strategists. And I got really burnt out. I was working 60 to 70 hour weeks on Taco Bell and Nike were some of our big accounts, and I just realized that I didn't even know how I felt about design. I just had like an existential crisis, as you do. And so I did what any normal person would do, and I packed everything into storage, broke up with my boyfriend, quit my job, and then backpacked around Europe on a one-way ticket. My mom was not happy. That's not the Asian American dream, in case any of you don't know. That's not what, like, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm gonna carry a backpack around Europe. She's like, did you know, like, all the stuff that happens in Europe? I'm like what, Mom? And she's like, there's a lot of stuff that happens over there. So I went on this trip and I did all the things, and my Instagram will tell the story, but what I realized about myself is that I did love design, but what I didn't love was helping major corporate companies to make more money. I love the power of design that it had to help people. And so now, after being in my 30s, I finally realized that I can use design for good. So that's my goal now, is to make sure that I contextualize everything I do ethically. That's something that journalism taught me. It might not be the case and be apparent now when you're reading a lot of stuff that happens, but journalism has a very strong ethical backbone. So I carry that journalistic tendency with me in my design work. So I knew that coming to this conference, everyone would be teaching you all these cool tools, and I felt like very untechnical. So I made you all a tool, and it's called the Privilege Plugin. It's the second version because I tested the first one on myself, and it's currently in beta. So this is what we're doing today, is you're all gonna learn how to use this tool. But as with any tool, there's terms and conditions. So there's a few things that you have to accept. And just like any terms and conditions that pop up, you actually can't leave. So you're stuck here. The terms and conditions for this talk are effectively, I'm going to be talking about some stuff that will probably make many of you uncomfortable. For many of you, it's your reality. You live this every day, so this will be familiar. But for a lot of you, this is stuff that you don't think about and you don't expect to hear at a tech conference. And thing number 2 is when you feel that discomfort or anger or annoyance at me, I just ask that you sit with it. You can't actually DM me because there's no internet, so that sucks for you. But I just ask that you sit with it, process it, and to do something that journalism taught me, which is when you don't understand something, to approach it with a sense of curiosity. Why might I be saying some of these things? Why might my point of view direct me in this direction for this talk? Okay, so when we think about privilege, which is what this talk is about, I think that some faces probably come to mind. Regina George from Mean Girls, maybe Jordan Belfort, the famed Wolf of Wall Street tycoon, or Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek. But privilege isn't just preserved for characters in fiction. It's also very much in our reality, and we're reminded when we try to keep up with the Kardashians, or avoid the dumpster fire in the administration, or even in our own tech darling, Markety Mark, who loves to store our passwords in plain text. So when we look at those faces, I think we think of privilege in very binary terms. Those people are privileged. We are not. But privilege's definition is quite a bit more nuanced than that. What it says is it is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted to only a particular person or group. All right, we're going to focus on the special right and advantage, and then groups. So this is a grid that I created of the common ways that we structure users. I'm kind of a nerd about forms, and if you ever want to just hear me like freak out, I will talk about forms forever and how they're horrible and inaccessible and all these things. But these are 8 things I think are commonly identified, not only in forms we request of our users, but also there are 8 things that we use to segment our users or to serve them up different content or to build our personas. So they're race, class, gender, religion, physical ability, orientation, nationality, which also has a derivative language associated, or languages, and then mental ability. Gonna switch gears for a second. I don't know if any of you have heard of the implicit association test. Raise your hand if you have. Oh, that makes me happy. I thought it was gonna be like one person who I told what it was. So the implicit association test basically puts 2 columns or 2 buttons, depending on if you're taking it on paper or on a computer. So we'll do the computer version. So you have 2 buttons, and one button is associated with each button is associated with 2 things. And this test exists for many different facets. So in the example, you're served up either images or words. And the images are either a black person or a white person. The words are either a good thing or a bad thing. And they're pretty, subjectivity, but they're pretty easy to discern, right? Like happiness is good, anger is bad, life is good, death is bad, so on and so forth. So what it does is it measures, you basically sit down and you're served up either an image or a word, and you either associate it with the left-hand button, say, white people or good, or the right-hand button, black people are bad. So you take this test and you try to be as accurate and as quick as possible. Then they switch. So then it goes white people or bad is one button, and black people or good is another. And this is a test that probably not everyone is ready to take because it's really humbling. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, a test that can be conveyed over many binary things, which I think it's important at this point to acknowledge that there are limitations to this test, right? So even this idea of gay people or straight people, well, that doesn't express all the different sexual orientations that exist. But what this test did and showed is that for all the millions of participants that have taken this test over time, 75% of people of all races associated white people more positively with good. That's pretty fucked up. If you're interested in this test and the psychology behind it, you can read this book with an ableist title called Blind Spot. And it effectively talks about hidden biases. It really dissects the test in terms of how they created it, its limitations, what it means, what we can do. But I highly recommend the book. It's a really interesting read. So, coming back here, we think about this. The biases that they found were not only just for white people. They were for straight people, and they were for English speakers, Americans, etc. And what if I told you that this isn't random? It's not just a fate of magical numbers. And what if I told you, in fact, that this is systematized? And what if I told you that system is the white, supremacist, capitalist patriarchy? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this term, but it's a term coined by a black feminist writer, Bell Hooks, who is a gift and one of the best writers to read if you have any curiosity about race, which I hope you would. But Bell Hooks coined this term to describe the inextricability of her womanness and of her blackness, because she found when she spoke about her oppression, people always tried to say, well, do you think that's because you're a woman, or do you think that's because you're black? And she can't extract those two things. She doesn't know. And so she coined this term to show that the systems of oppression are compounding and they're intersectional. That's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is also a black feminist writer who everyone should read. So this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy is not by accident. America was founded on this principle. And the reason is because that principle is what protects white, wealthy, able-bodied, heterosexual, Protestant, American, cis males who are neurotypical. That's who founded the country. That's who wanted to preserve their power. You might be thinking right now, yeah, but I'm not privileged. I'll let you in on a little secret. We all are. By nature of being here at this conference, which Estelle and team have done an amazing job at, we are all privileged to be here, to be on our high-end devices, to be hearing about these things, and to be working in tech. And I think this is something we often take for granted. So we're going to start installing this privilege plugin. First thing we're going to do is confront our privilege. So I'm going to start with me, because maybe some of you are a little uncomfortable. I have a lot of privilege, and my privileges are that I'm an able-bodied, neurotypical, and wealthy American. This is what comprises what I'll call my privilege block. But we don't really like to talk about ourselves in such binary terms, because it erases a lot of our experiences, our nuance, things that we feel like define who we are as whole and complete people. So we'll add some color to this. All right, so I'm able-bodied, but I don't know if you noticed, even with these very tall boots, I'm quite petite. And this is something I'm reminded of every single day when I try to leave my apartment building. I'm not tall enough to clear the sensor to unlock the door. So I have to do this thing where I like walk at a specific angle, back up, and then hope that I hit the sensor. And when that happens to me, I'm not just reminded that I'm short. I think about people who are in wheelchairs, people who are shorter than I am, children. So while I'm able-bodied, I do experience a little bit of a challenge there. And I'm an American, but I'm a first-generation Asian American. And I'm reminded of this every time I get into a lift and I'm alone. I get the question, where are you from? Portland. No. Where are you really from? No. What flavor are you? That one's my favorite. And I'm wealthy. I live above poverty. I have access to clean water, shelter, regular food. But I'm only moderately wealthy. I'm not Jeff Bezos wealthy. But to drag him for a second, I actually donated a higher percentage of my salary last year than he did. So that's a thing I can hang my hat on. But I was raised poor, so my parents are immigrants, being first generation. So all of the wealth I have is wealth that either my parents created or wealth that I created. It wasn't inherited. And while I'm neurotypical, I do experience suicidal ideation and depression. So it's not just what we squarely have and don't have. There's actually a lot of privileges that are beyond my block. So while I'm not white, I'm light-skinned and I'm Asian American. And there's something called the model minority myth. And if you don't know about it, it's annoying, but basically it's like, well, Asians are rich, so there's no racism. And while I'm not a cis male, I don't really believe in the gender binary. I do experience tremendous privilege by presenting in a way that society understands and identifies me as. And while I'm not Protestant, I don't practice a religion that automatically reveals my faith because of a religious head covering, for example. So even though I don't squarely have those characteristics, I do gain a tremendous amount of privilege because of my proximity to them. Here's a little plot twist. I just watched Us. I won't spoil anything, but I love a good plot twist. So privilege on its own is actually harmless. And it's like Gretchen Wieners in Mean Girls. And if you haven't seen this movie, you should probably never come to another talk I do because it's literally in every single talk I do. For those of you who don't know, Mean Girls is about a bunch of high schoolers, and Lindsay Lohan is trying to fit in with this clique. Gretchen Wieners is kind of your typical ditzy, somewhat harmless character. But she has a friend who's power. That's the thing. Privilege is what gains us power. So, when I told you about this little block, I also made a block for my friend Eric, who will be speaking after me, and you'll notice he's more privileged than I am. But what are these blocks for? Well, when I told you this was a grid, I kind of lied to you. It's not just a grid. It's actually a wall. So what our privilege does is it gives us a leg up on this wall. The more privilege we have, the easier it is to overcome this wall. And if we check all the boxes, we see no wall at all. So privilege doesn't dictate how hard we work, how far we go. You know, Eric and I aren't fated to those privilege blocks. We still have control over our fates, but privilege determines where we start. And it's unfortunate, but until someone stands on stage in a hot pink suit and tells you, our privileges are somewhat invisible to us. So I love this cartoon, but I'm a design snob, so I remade it because I thought it wasn't cute. So effectively, it's the little Pac-Man dot, and it says, the world is unjust. Pac-Man's like, there is some justice. And then Pinky says, the world is just. We have to look at what's at play here. The dot can't move. So yeah, its injustice is valid. Pac-Man and Pinky can move. What privileges we're born with, why Eric and I ended up with those privilege blocks that we did was completely random. We had no choice in that matter. But the systems that granted us our relative power is not. So when we look at this graph, or diagram, I think it's easy to look not towards our privilege, like we are today, but instead to look towards our oppression. Most days, we're not looking at what we take for granted and the ways in which the system benefits us, but we're looking towards what we don't have, the ways in which the system disadvantaged us. This is by design. Capitalism scares us with scarcity. It tells us that if we work harder, we can get more. Well, let's think about that for a second. Why would capitalism want us all to work harder? To make it more money. So we're going to talk a little bit about a real-world example here. I don't know if most of you probably know this, but Lyft just IPO'd earlier this month at $24.3 billion. This little guy here, Logan G, is now evaluated at a cool $750 million, up from, I think his prior valuation was closer to 300 and some. Now let's look at the average Lyft driver, which I Googled average Lyft driver, and this person came up, and I'm like, this is not what any of my Lyft drivers look like. But MIT conducted a study, and they found that after expenses were considered, that the average Lyft driver is only pulling in $3.30 an hour. That's less than federal minimum wage, which you can't live on. And if you do the math, 40 hours a week at 52 weeks a year, taking no vacations, no health insurance, you're making $7,000. So we don't earn everything we receive. I think we can agree that the Lyft driver isn't, or that Logan Green isn't working 128,000 times harder than the average Lyft driver. And if we calculate our own salaries, he's probably not, Logan Green's probably not working, 80,000 times harder than you or I. So that's where we have to reflect that we don't earn everything that we receive. So here comes meritocracy. This word is the bane of my existence. If you follow the college admission scandal at all, it's a word that comes up very frequently, and essentially it's the idea that things like goods or power should be vested based on talent, effort, achievement, rather than factors like sexuality, race, gender, or wealth. Okay. I think we can all agree, based on the example I showed you, that none of you thinks that Logan Green works 80 to 100,000 times harder than you do. So I think we can all say that we're gathered here today to say goodbye and farewell to our friend meritocracy. So we might experience the 5 stages of grief as we do when something dies. So we'll walk through them and what they might look like. Denial, well, I work hard for everything. Or anger, slavery wasn't my fault. Bargaining, but why not a men's month? Depression, I hate my privilege. To acceptance, where I hope we can all arrive, which is that privilege isn't my fault, but it is my responsibility. And as the great James Baldwin informs us, nothing can be changed until it is faced. That's why it's so important for us to confront our privilege. So we know that our friend Privilege here is friends with power, but that's not the only set of friends she has. She also has 2 other friends, bias and ignorance. So privilege gains us our power, and ignorance is what hides our bias. So step 2 of the installation is to admit your bias. So looking at this wall here of characteristics, I want you to remember that. So for those of you who work in accessibility, this is familiar, but there's an organization called WebAIM that measures accessibility of sites. This year, they released a report called The Majestic Million, and it was effectively a study that assessed the accessibility of the 1 million most popular sites. And spoiler alert, the results were really bad, like depressingly bad. And when we look at the things that it failed on, this graph isn't the best way to visualize this, but over 75, I would say 80% of sites fail on basic contrast. That is not a complex thing to fix. It's just negligent. Same with missing alt text, empty links. The list goes on. I highly recommend, especially if you work at a company who you think the website might be on there, to check it. Because the average website has like 69 errors, and a lot of them are really simple to fix. So why would this be the case? Well, it's because we center the able-bodied and neurotypical experience. We test it for ourselves. We don't consider how it affects everyone else. Now, so this year I'm really trying to, if anyone has pro tips, I'm really trying to hack like mileage points. I don't fully understand it, and I've been reading a lot of blogs about it, but I've signed up for a bunch of mileage programs, and I noticed something. This is 4 major airlines. They all list mail first, which I thought was interesting. It's not alphabetical. I guess it has fewer characters, so maybe it's going in character order. Or maybe it's religious. Maybe it's because God made Adam first, and then he made Eve. No, it's because we center the cis male experience. I read this morning that in the Fortune 500, 5% of the Fortune 500 are women. I don't know if this will load. I learned a lot about images today, and I didn't fix this. So this is a hand trying, like the automatic soap dispensers, trying to get soap out. It's not working. It's a dark skin tan. Also, self-driving cars are more likely to hit black pedestrians than white ones. That's because we center the white experience. This is kind of hard to see, so I apologize, but this is the DevTools inspector and the devices that you can show. And you'll notice that there's iPhones, Galaxy Notes, a couple Pixels, the random Nokia 8110. But when we look at the phones that represent the world, like Techno and Huawei, those ones aren't represented there. And that's because we center the American experience. So as you can see, this list can go on, and I could spend an entire day talking about all the horrible examples in tech. But what I want to illustrate here is that at some point, they drew a range. We defined something. We defined a skin tone. We defined contrast. We defined appropriate device spending. But we're missing a lot of the picture, it seems. And that's because our worldview is narrow. We deny our subjectivity. We really like to hide behind math. And I'll tell you, as a math major, we can't do this anymore. If we look at the language we use, usable or unusable, maybe even the heights that defined who can fit through the door of my apartment, 5'11" to 5 feet, the amount of time we're willing to wait for a website to load, 2 seconds, maybe 10 milliseconds, or 1 mile to 10 miles, the distance we're willing to go. Or maybe sometimes we even abstract these things. Something is hard or easy, tall or short, fast or slow, far or near. We're bringing at it a neurotypical, able-bodied, wealthy point of view. I love this tweet. It's Ryan Saavedra, and he says, Socialist Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claims that algorithms, which are driven by math, are racist. Well, there's 2 books I wish he would read. 2 of them being Algorithms of Oppression and Technically Wrong. These 2 books dive into the many ways in which the algorithms we create perpetuate our bigoted points of view. And we have to remember that we're the ones defining this viewport. This is what we define in the viewport. So when we look at these characteristics again, and we see how we stack up, we have to remember that our position is not absolute. It's relative. So we have to contextualize every absolute we set within that relative. So here we have our stance. Here's my position. Here's Eric's. Next step, lessen your ignorance. So this is what's squarely in our viewport. This is what we focus everything on. It's not just user experiences. Look to film. Look to when the first time a black director won for Best Picture. Look to our media and who's represented. Look to foundation colors for skin. The examples are so loud and clear as to how much we focus everything within this viewport, even if we aren't there. I'm not squarely in that viewport, and I'm always worried about the people that fit into those 8 characteristics. So what we have to do, I'm going to use a term I hate, but we have to have an awareness that we're focused above the fold. And we have to demonstrate a curiosity for what lies beyond. So consume media that doesn't center your experience. So a little story. For those of you who don't know, this is a screenshot from Bow. It was a Pixar short that came before Incredibles 2. And it was effectively, I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's effectively about a woman and her relationship with her son and making dumplings. When I went to see this, I overheard so many people being like, that didn't make any sense. That was so weird. What are they talking about? And meanwhile, I was sitting in my seat and trying to hide my hysterical crying because it was the first time that I really saw my relationship with my own mother visualized on film. So understand that not everything, that's cool, not everything is made for your understanding. A word about empathy. Empathy is a scam, y'all. Because empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference, and the capacity to place oneself in another's position. Empathy basically seeks to validate someone else's experience by recentering your own. This is what empathy is doing. It's aligning self to center. So what we need to do is we need to replace empathy with trust. We need to trust your user's lived experiences over your own presumptions. Last, we must share our power. There's a saying in accessibility that I love because it doesn't just apply squarely within accessibility, it applies to everything, which is nothing about us without us. So there's a saying, we like to say that diversity is going to fix everything, and there's a saying that diversity is being invited to the party. And Verna Myers, who is VP of Inclusion at LinkedIn, said that inclusion is being asked to dance. It's lovely. But I'm here to tell you, justice is letting someone else throw the party. So hand over the keys to queer, disabled, trans, immigrant, Muslim, Black, Indigenous women of color. You're thinking, okay, so should I just step aside? No, what you can do in your points of privilege is to look at this wall and to find ways to start to dismantle it. Because we can continue to be here and to help give or hand over privilege to someone else temporarily, but what does that mean for future generations who will continue to face the same struggles? We'll continue to repeat history. So until we take this wall down, we're fated to the same fates. So, another saying, accessibility helps everyone. Taking away that wall helps white, cis, able-bodied, hetero males too. So, to install this plugin, I present you with a choice. You can either opt to take the red pill, which snaps you back to this reality. It's messier, it's more difficult, you'll make mistakes, you'll be called out, but you'll start to build a world where everyone is included. Or you can take the blue pill and you can continue to live with your privilege and to ignore everything that it gives to you. So I hope that when you make this choice, you also recognize that it isn't a one-time choice. You're not just making this choice when you sit here today with me yelling at you in a hot pink suit. This is a choice you make with every pull request, with every conversation, with every action and word that you use in your daily life. And you will mess up. Some days you'll take the wrong pill. But apologize and move on. And I hope that you all decide to do the right fucking thing. Thank you.